Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Bryce is Right. My name is Bryce Cornell, and I'm all about promoting positive atheism and secular humanism. Today, I am interviewing Anthony Magnabosco. He is the creator of Street Epistemology, the YouTube channel and movement surrounding that. And I also have a last-minute co-host tonight. You know him as Shane the Skeptic. I would like to remind anyone in the chats right now, if you have questions, please feel free to add them. I do prioritize super chats, hint, hint, wink, wink, but we'll try to get to the chats as they come regardless. And without further ado, let me bring in my co-host, Shane the Skeptic, and also our featured guest, Anthony Magnabosco. How's it going, guys?
Hey, good. How are you guys doing?
Good, real good. Can I correct you on one thing right at the intro?
Sure.
I didn't create Street Epistemology, but I've been promoting it. I discovered it, liked it, and I think we've developed it quite further on from where it started. Mm-hmm. But in all fairness to the person that started it, it's not my baby.
I had a justified true belief that Anthony was going to say that. I can't say I knew it.
This is, I have to give you credit, Anthony. This may be the first time the Bryce was wrong.
Oh,
the Bryce was wrong.
Put me down.
That doesn't happen too often. So that is the greatness that is Anthony.
Your intro music's pretty good. I like it.
Thank you.
It wasn't long enough. I wanted more.
Take credit for that.
You left me wanting more.
We used to have a longer version of that, and then we decided, is this really necessary? Is it overkill? Are we eating up time? I don't know. Maybe we'll switch it up every now and then since you just complimented us on it.
Well, please don't do it off of mine. Like, go off the stats or something. Like, we lose people when we play the intro for 1 minute.
Yeah, right. Since I have one of my intros is like a minute long, I only use that intro if I'm doing a stream where it's going to be like an hour or more or something like that. If it's for a video that's going to be less than 10 minutes, I just leave it out because it's like I'm not going to have a 10-minute video with a minute intro. So,
which kind of flies in the face of logic, doesn't it? Like, wouldn't you want like a shorter, because it's already a long video, wouldn't you want to like trim off as much of the start as you want, like as you should?
Well, that's one way of looking at it, but if the way you're looking at it is what percentage of the video is going to be the intro, because if you have a minute long intro, then you're looking at like 10% of your content is just your intro, as opposed to where if it's like a little over an hour, you're like, okay, well, we can, we have time for a minute intro because, we're not just going to be here for a few minutes. We're actually going to be here for a longer time.
Yeah. I usually play around with my videos too and put a little clip at the start or something. But sometimes I wonder, should I just get right to the conversation? I don't know.
It's like, I remember back in the day when TV shows used to have these intros with credits and music, and that was just kind of like the regular thing they had. Now shows don't do that anymore.
They go
just
right into it,
straight into the episode, saving time. So I don't know. It's kind of a bit of a nostalgia whenever I see a show that has that. Anyway, Street Epistemology. You were talking about how you were not the creator of it, but you certainly took it and ran with it.
He certainly popularized it.
I like to think so. Yeah, I've been going out with my camera and recording talks, putting them online, and that was probably the most visible example of SE at the time. These days, I'm not uploading as many videos as other people are, so there are more active practitioners of it. But Street Epistemology is not just uploading videos where you're stopping people on the street to explore their deeply held belief. You can use it anywhere with anyone at any time.
You're contrasting the recording of it for a YouTube presentation with just doing it in your daily life. And it doesn't always have to be just about religious deconversion or anything like that either, right?
Right. It could be any given position that somebody has. And like I remember I've used SE in the break room at work, with a few coworkers about giving, political views they have, or, whatever their opinions on vaccines were. And I actually got somebody to change his mind about being hesitant about the Moderna vaccine because, I started, not challenging him, not telling him he was wrong, but just applying SE to him and asking him about, his belief. And he was like, oh, well, there are people who've got blood clots from it. And I was like, well, there are people who've got blood clots from smoking, and I see you smoking. And he was talking about how rare it is for somebody to get blood clots from smoking. And then I was like, so if you're telling me, I started asking him more questions, and I was able to get him to go, okay, now that I think about it. And, actually getting into reading Socrates recently, it's an interesting approach to get somebody to point out the inconsistency in their position. Because it's one thing if you just tell them that they're wrong, but if you ask them a series of questions in which they're forced to give their answers and their answers are contradictory, you're able to point out the inconsistency in their view, and you don't even actually have to say anything to the effect of like, you're wrong.
That's exactly what we do in SE. Exactly. So that's cool that you were able to use it there. Yeah, definitely. You can use it way more than just, interrogating people's views on why they think God is real. I'd like to see many more examples where people are using it with everyday conversations like that online. That would be really neat, because I think there's a stigma that you can only use this approach with God beliefs. And we're really trying to overcome that. But there are so many, and I keep uploading video examples where I'm talking to people about their God belief too. So I'm not really helping in that regard, but it's one of my favorite topics. And I think it's so damn effective on that specific claim. It's hard to yank me away from it. And I do try to talk about other topics too, but I guess I'll probably just leave that up to future generations.
It's interesting. You use the word stigma there, suggesting that talking about religion or having a discussion that may lead someone away from religion is a bad thing, or that it's viewed as a bad thing. Is that what you meant by that? Or is that just what you think the perception is?
Maybe a little bit of both. Like, I think that there's a stigma when people think of street epistemology. They may think you need to go out of the street and you're talking to strangers about why they think God is real. That's like 80% of the examples online, maybe. And that number's probably going down.
Well, it's easy to
that's the stigma that I'm trying to overcome.
Perspective, and I understand that like I was saying earlier,
it's a fair assessment.
I use it
because we have video examples out there of us doing that.
Yeah, you see the videos; they're doing it out on the street. You see the word street epistemology, and you think like, okay, so street epistemology is this thing where you set up a camera and you ask random people about their God belief, and that is how it appears on the surface. In many cases, it is in fact that. And that's one of the reasons people think that. But once you learn about what it is, it's simply a method for conversations.
Well, let's get to that.
Though. Well, it's a little maddening when people who are identifying as skeptics see 3 examples of SE and then come to a hard conclusion about what it is. Try to be a little bit more forgiving about what it is you're viewing and what you think it is, than before you make up your mind.
Yeah, maybe they're using the word skeptic incorrectly as well. I mean, I'm sure Shane is using it right, but a lot of people call themselves skeptics, and you wonder if they know what it is,
Right. Well, I think it's within our nature as skeptics to question whether or not someone identifying as a skeptic is in fact one.
Right.
I'm always careful though, because I don't want to commit a no true skeptic fallacy where I look at an example of somebody, let's just say, failing to be a skeptic, because I've failed to be a skeptic myself. I can't say that there are times that I've been wrong about things, and it's not just that I was wrong. It's that I'm like, okay, wow, I kind of failed as a skeptic. I just got there for a really bad reason. And of course my skepticism gets stronger with experiences like that. So, I could be grateful when I'm wrong and I'm like, okay, well now I have to think more in a similar situation like this. But, yeah, I don't know. I'm always hesitant to say somebody isn't a skeptic because of a particular instance in which they failed to apply skepticism.
Right. I think it would be fair to say they failed to apply skepticism, just the way that you said it there.
Yeah.
Perhaps in just that one instance, maybe, because they heard somebody say that's what it's about. Then they went to watch a few videos and then confirmed that that's what it's about. Street epistemology, for example, and then that was good enough. And then they stopped there. And the next time somebody mentioned it, they kicked them to the curb because it didn't.
In my honest opinion, I think that legitimate skepticism comes from habituation. I think that if you realize skepticism is effective and you decide you're going to become a skeptic, start identifying as a skeptic, applying, skeptical methods, then I think that it's not like the next day, now you're good at being a skeptic and you're not going to be fooled easily or tricked easily, or you're not going to arrive at false beliefs easily. You're on the right path, but it comes through habituation. So you have to make mistakes on your way. And every time you're wrong, every time I find out I'm wrong about something, I try to really analyze like, okay, what are some things that I was wrong about? What are some things I could have realized earlier that would have led me to realize that I was wrong? What are some things I failed to think about? What are some flaws in my thinking that I made?
What were the warning signs, maybe?
Right, that I missed.
We need to pick your brain a little bit more towards the end of the show, Shane, because Anthony and I were talking really before we started the show about how the heck is this kid so smart? And forgive me for calling you kid, because you seem so much younger and smarter than the rest of us did when we were that age. So we will be picking your brain a little bit more towards the end of the show. But Anthony, I want to ask you, do you have any formal education in philosophy or critical thinking? Because this seems like something someone would have to be able to do what you do as easily as you do it.
Oh, none, really. I mean, I worked in the service industry when I was in high school, working for like a fast food place, talking with the public. And then I worked for a chemical company and I designed databases. So like maybe I'm kind of thinking, I was actually wondering myself, like, why did I take so well to this approach?
Mm-hmm.
And that may be part of it. I also ran a small business where we were interacting with customers and selling. There was a sales component to it. So maybe you pay a little bit more attention to what people are saying and how they're saying it and that type of thing. And then probably countless hours of watching The Atheist Experience was incredibly helpful for me becoming comfortable with my non-belief.
Mm-hmm.
And learning the arguments and that type of thing. And then I started finding podcasts like You Are Not So Smart with David McRaney, which is just fantastic. It talks about the things our brains do to protect ourselves from the harms that can come from belief revision. All the things our brains do to hold on to those beliefs because they serve that purpose, even though they may not be true. So it was just sort of a confluence of that over time. And then when I discovered this method and started using it, it was profoundly impacting my conversations and me as a person.
Mm-hmm.
I was becoming a lot more empathetic to the people that I was speaking with. So
What is it?
That was that.
What is it that made you want to do this? Was it just the experience that you had with it, realizing how effective it was at helping your own clarity of thought, or was it just this empathetic desire that you had to help other people? Why did you get into street epistemology?
The appeal to me was originally the main idea of the book, which was called How to Have there's a new book, which is called A Manual for Creating Atheists, because I was an atheist arguing with theists and having knockdown, drag out arguments where I felt like crap afterwards. And I was hungry for a better approach that I didn't feel like crap afterwards, so that was appealing to me. And then I went out, and then the other part of that was like, I saw people uploading content in the atheist community. And I thought, I think I want to do that. I think I want to try to help normalize atheism. That was a big part of it. So it was like those things coming together and then realizing, wow, that was a good conversation. I uploaded it to YouTube. I got 50 views and I got 3 comments that explained like some things that I can try next time. And I just kept repeating it, just growing, getting better at it.
And so it sounds like a little bit of process of trial and error was involved with that.
Still is.
Yeah, it's a good point. So you just mentioned a while ago that you used to be religious. I believe you used to be Catholic. Is that right?
Did I mention that?
You didn't, but I've heard you say it in other videos, so I'm mentioning it for everybody.
Okay. Shout outs to recovering Catholics.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I'm actually in conversation with the mom of my best friend. He's passed, but I'm still in talks with her, and she's a Catholic. In fact, she called into the Atheist Experience once. But
how'd that work out for her?
She enjoyed it, and she called back a second time. Yeah, she brought it up again, like she remembers it. But to answer your question, yeah, I was raised religious.
How devout were you?
Very little.
Okay.
Everyone around me was, and I was like, why are people believing this stuff? This is ridiculous. I'm like 8 years old, and I'm like, this is like made up, right? What are they doing? And then if you try to talk about it, you get kind of shut down. Like, don't say that. You shouldn't question. Just pray harder.
That was a big one for me. That was a big thing that did it. It wasn't just people not having answers to my questions. That's fine. It was my questions being frowned upon. That only made me more curious. Like, okay,
yes.
Now I'm wondering why I'm not supposed to ask questions.
What are they hiding?
That's suspicious.
So both of you, it sounds like from an early age, it never really, you've always been skeptic, it sounds like.
I actually, I look back and I think about the fact that I definitely have always been a skeptic, and one of the best examples of this is the fact that I actually recall I had to touch fire to believe that it was hot. Like, I hadn't been associated, like I knew what heat was, but I hadn't experienced heat to the point of pain. So when my parents told me, don't touch that, it's hot, and I'm like, I know what hot is. They're like, no, it hurts you. I genuinely had to touch fire to know that that was true. Curiosity, and the fact that I actually had to touch the fire to find out, that I think says something about me being a skeptic from a young age.
Yeah. How about you, Anthony? Any fire touching?
I didn't touch fire, but I distinctly remember being a kid in my bedroom, and I shared the room with my brother, but he was out of the room at the time. And I remember hiding behind a dresser thinking, I wonder if God's watching me. And you're not supposed to swear or say the F word or make any gestures. So I remember hiding behind a dresser and like secretly doing the finger, but hiding it. Because I was like, well, if God's real, he could see that I'm doing, I think I was actually hiding I don't know exactly remember what I was doing, but I was doing
God
something.
That you were flipping off, or were you just, okay.
No, I think
were you just
general,
if he would know, like I'm cussing.
It was like a test of sorts. Like, if this God's real, there should be some repercussions of some sort for me doing this.
Why
if anyone ever sees Anthony and I in person and I'm doing this to him, you'll have a good guess what it is.
Why were you hiding if the point was to see if something would happen?
I think I was hiding more from my family because I was really not encouraged to question the orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm.
I was hiding from them, testing God.
What do you think is the biggest factor that led to your deconversion? I've heard you, just to set this up a little bit more, I've heard you mention The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. I have that. I think most of us probably have that.
That was the final nail in the coffin for me. I think it came much earlier than that.
Okay, what was it?
I think it was instances where I was growing up as a kid and going to Catholic school and listening to what I was being taught and comparing it to like how it seemed like the world really behaved and noticing that it didn't jive. And that was probably it, like those discrepancies between reality and what we were being told, down to even like, well, this is how boys should act and this is how girls should act. And then them literally dividing us by the words that they were telling us. Like, it was just insidious. It was insidious.
And the fact that you were able to recognize that so young to the point where you never got into it, what is the explanation for all of the other kids? Because it seems like this is an effective way, at least partially, in indoctrinating people. Catholic school, Christian schools, regular church attendance. It works on a lot of people.
Yeah,
it didn't work on either of you. But
what is the success rate though? Like,
that's a good question.
Like, how many years do you have to be in that religion before it's like, okay, yep, that method of getting people into this was successful? Who knows? I mean, maybe half the class was just as doubtful as I was, but nobody talked about it. I didn't start talking about this stuff until I was 20, in my late 20s, maybe. And even then I was like, well, I'm an agnostic. I'm not an atheist, but I'm definitely an agnostic. And then it was Dawkins's book where I was like, gosh darn it, I'm an atheist.
Was it fear?
I want to do something about it.
Was it fear keeping you from saying that, or keeping you from asking the questions?
It was ignorance. I just didn't. It wasn't important enough for me at that time to really care what the definitions were. That's what was so invigorating about watching the Atheist Experience shows and shows like yours, is you hear people just casually talking about things that were so taboo growing up. So that was really appealing. Like, oh, wow, they're finally talking about something that I'm really interested in. And then you start learning the terminology and that it's okay to be an atheist and to question, and you can still be a good person without these beliefs. Those were very important messages for me to hear.
Mm-hmm. And you only really hear it's okay to be an atheist from, it seems, the atheist community. We still are a minority, and it's still not normalized, as you said before.
That's only where we hear it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's only the effect of what he was saying. I think George Carlin had something to do with me leaning away from my religion, because multiple times I would hear his, the religion is bullshit thing. And it was just, him saying like, okay, so God comes up to 10 people when no one else is around And then I was thinking about just Moses alone, because that was where a lot of the really important rules came from. You know, I was a Catholic, so the 10 Commandments were a big fucking deal. And I'm just thinking, like, wait a minute. A long time ago, thousands of years ago, God just came to this guy when no one else was around. Like, and we're just all taking that guy's word for it, huh? Okay.
Yeah,
like, George Carlin's kind of got a point here.
If you guys have not checked out some of George Carlin, you can find these clips on YouTube. Religion is Bullshit. That's a pretty funny one. There's a lot of them. I strongly recommend it. He was ahead of his time in that, and maybe even self-consciously listening to him sort of did something to me as well. I don't know, but so you guys
now that you mention it. Yeah, I was going to say, now that you mention it, that's probably the only little glimmers outside of the atheist community that I didn't really discover until the mid 2000s, maybe the late 2000s. Actually, it's like around 2012, maybe 2010 that I started noticing it. But yeah, every once in a while you get a comedian maybe that said something where everyone in the room like gasped, but I was like, there's something to them. No, why are you gasping? There was information in there that was useful.
Right.
Yeah, and it was funny too because it's
there's
funny.
A little bit of truth to it.
Funny because it's true.
So they're laughing. Why are they laughing at something that's so dissuaded normally? So there's also that sort of detecting little things like that was like, what's going on?
Yeah. And he was this is the last thing I'm gonna say about George Carlin, but he was genius enough to recognize that, to know that this is totally taboo, what I'm saying. I may not have a career after this, but there's enough laughter there that people are getting what I'm saying, even if they're not publicly acknowledging it. And he would do this bit over and over again and grow it and make it more elaborate to the point where it just became, it's almost like it became okay for him to do it because he was a comedian, but not okay for normal people. You know, it's like comedians can talk about race and religion.
But I think that's one of the reasons that like mockery and satire, like they have their place, you know, like if I go on a Christian channel and have a formal debate, you know, I'm not going to carry myself like George Carlin, but we need our George Carlins out there. You know, we need people who are going to make fun of religion, who are going to make jokes and laugh at the expense of it. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I would say that
we stand on their shoulders. Like these folks that came way before us that were so cutting edge and edgy, like where it is today, you might not even notice that they made a religious joke because it was so tame. So we really have them to thank looking back on it. And I'm sure there will be people coming after us, you know, that can stand on our shoulders too.
Hope so. If this all goes well. If Pasta Mike's plan to normalize atheism goes well, there will be people after us. I actually think that there's room for multiple approaches on this. I think the comedic take is one. I think what you guys are doing and just trying to have empathetic conversations with people and reason with them and approaching it almost like you're teaching, like this is a teachable moment rather than a condemnation or I can't stand you people moment, you know? Right. I do think that there is a place for the Matt Dillahunties and the really aggressive types, because I think that there are people who only understand that. I don't think that that's the only way or that it should be the only way. And I think that it has the potential of turning off people that could be reached as well. So
I think Matt would probably agree with that too. Like there are different styles. You find a style that works best for you, for the environment that you're in, and go with it. But my recommendation is to figure out who you're talking with and where you need to meet them.
Right.
Some people, you might be able to meet them with humor or a gentle SE approach or an aggressive in your face. Here's the contradiction that shows that your contradiction is there's
right.
So now I have a question for both of you, and this is where we're going to get into the epistemology phase of the discussion. What's epistemology?
Well,
it's one of those six.
You take it, Shane. You take the epistemology one, and I'll do the SE one.
You do SE. I'll do epistemology. So, epistemology in rough terms would probably just be deduced to the study of the theory of knowledge. So, it's really the study of how beliefs are arrived at, what it means to know something, and you have to have. You can give a meta-analysis of what theory of knowledge even means. So that's one of the reasons earlier when you were saying, you would ask us to define epistemology. It's like one of those things where you could just give a quick definition to be simple about it, but you could also turn defining epistemology itself into an hour-long discussion. We're not going to do that, but
yeah. And one of the reasons I asked the question is because I feel like it is a word that is used frequently recently, and it's a 6-syllable word, and a lot of people have grown accustomed.
People are using it more.
I do, but I'm not convinced that they necessarily know what it means or how to use it.
Yeah. My recommendation is when you see that word, just think method. The method that somebody's using to arrive at a truth claim or something that they think that they know. That's what I
would say the evaluation of methods, rather than
the evaluation of methods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the evaluation of methods used to arrive at beliefs.
That's kind of what we do in SE.
Yeah,
we try to figure out like how are you getting to that conclusion, and how reliable do you think it is?
Right.
Not how reliable do I think your methodology or your epistemology is, but
because
you're the one that has the belief.
Epistemology is also one of those words where, it's like the word theology means like the study of the nature of God, but theologians have different theologies. You have your Calvinists, you have your non-Calvinists, your, Catholics who are believe in predestiny. So
we'll hold that thought for a second, because this is going to lead into my next question.
He's got a list, Shane. We got to get through it.
Yeah, sociology is the study of human culture and society. Cosmology is the study of the universe. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. Can someone have their own epistemology?
I guess so.
I would say pretty much everybody has to have their own unique epistemology in one way or another, because you can adhere to, say rationalism or empiricism, but you're going to have at some point your own view as to, in respect to the problem of the criterion, which I can get into later if that's necessary. You might be a particularist and not a Methodist, but you might have one person who's an empiricist and a particularist, and one person who's a rationalist and a Methodist. Like, people are going to take all these different approaches because there are different labels, different titles within epistemology that refer to different aspects of it. So, like, for example, I'm a process reliabilist, which means that I believe that in order to be justified in a belief, somebody has to have arrived at that belief through some justification conferring process. And that's, your senses would be it has to be a reliable process that they arrived at it through in order for it to be justified, quote unquote. So, different labels refer to different questions within epistemology.
Right.
So empiricist, and rationalist is about, if you're an empiricist, then you think that in all knowledge, anything that you have to have arrived at through the means of your senses. And then rationalists, that you could have knowledge a priori of any interpretation via the means of the senses. And I think there's a little bit of there's some discrepancy over where the disagreement begins on those two, but it'll take me a long time to describe that. So.
And I'm assuming when you said Methodist a few minutes ago, you were not speaking about the church denomination.
No, not the church denomination. So
okay, that's kind of important.
Yeah, Methodist in contrast to particularist. So these are labels that are used as answers in respect to the problem of the criterion. And the problem of the criterion is the problem that comes up when one is trying to define knowledge. And you can roughly summarize the problem of the criterion in terms of the following two claims. So you're trying to identify knowledge, and you can only identify instances of knowledge if you have knowledge of the criteria. If you have knowledge of the criteria for knowledge, right? What are the characteristics of knowledge? But you could also only identify the characteristics and the criteria of knowledge if you have knowledge of, the definition. If you have an understanding of what knowledge is. You have to assume a definition of knowledge for granted from the outset in order to get there. So if you are to assume that you know what the criteria for knowledge is in order to identify instances of knowledge, then you would be a Methodist. And if you assume that you could know the definition of knowledge in order to identify instances of it and then establish a criteria based on that, then you'd be a particularist. I'm a particularist rather than a Methodist. I give a video that gives a better explanation than I just gave, but there are two different approaches. Descartes would be a Methodist. So it's important to note because yes, it's not the church denomination of Methodism. It's a form of epistemology.
When you talk about knowledge, do we make our own definitions of knowledge?
Yes. In our own sort of way, yes. Now, the problem is you can't have a definition of knowledge that is in no way compatible with what people mean by it. So you have to have a definition that is in some way consistent with our linguistic intuition of what that word means. Mm-hmm. And linguistic intuition is the reason I'm a particularist. I'm able to start talking about what instances of knowledge are. What are some examples of knowledge? What do I mean by it? I'm able to kind of address that with an assumption of what knowledge is based off linguistic intuition. So
we got a question in the chat from Bill Castle a little while ago. The question was for Anthony. He wants to know, who was your most memorable street interview, good or bad? And we'll pop that up in a second. As soon
you want to go first, Anthony?
I guess the question could apply for both of you. But
I've done SE too, so yeah.
If you have a particularly,
my most memorable is probably the one I enjoyed the most, or the one. Well, gosh, the ones that I'm uploading right now are superb. So one comes to mind is this young lady who originally said that it didn't really matter if she believed things that were true or not. And then by the end of the short talk, she was like, yeah, I guess I really do value truth. And even though it might be painful to let a belief go. And then she came back a few weeks later, and then we explored one of her claims. Those are on my channel. I have a top 10 playlist, and you'll find it. One's about truth, and the other one's about, forget what I called the other one, evidence or something like that. That was probably my most memorable. Although recently I've been sitting on this one interview for like 2 years. I'm finally getting around to editing it and getting the permission to do it and hiring somebody to do the voiceover. And it's this guy who has been watching SE videos and attempting to use the method with his wife, who thinks that the earth is very young. And he's sharing with me all of his successes and failures and challenges of doing that. So it wasn't even really like an SE talk, but we were talking about SE. Mm-hmm. But it'd be hard to say, but I have a playlist on my channel, my top 10 and my top 20. So if you want to see some of my favorites, that's what they'd be.
I think I saw a piece of that, one of the videos you uploaded recently, and noticed that the individual's voice was masked and that the background was sort of distorted. Is that something that you have to do, that you find that you have to do often, or is that a particularly rare thing? That's one of those words I can't say, by the way.
It's rare only because I just never did it. But then I discovered there's this plugin for the video editing software that I have. And I was like, I'm going to buy that and just put it in there and just play around with it. And then I started, it sort of dawned on me that maybe I can use this overlay to make it a little bit more difficult to tell who it is I'm speaking with for some of those interviews where they're like borderline, should I upload them or not? Because I'm not going out as much. So now I'm taking a look at my library of interviews and I'm like, maybe that one's ready for prime time now. And I'm putting these overlays and things on it.
What inspired the decision for you to hold off on uploading them right away? It's because that's amazing that you have a library of interviews that you can always go back to. But, conventional wisdom would suggest that you would upload them while they were fresh, but it looks like you've been sitting on them. So why do you think, why is that the case?
Well, in one case, I wasn't really sure if it would be a good fit, but sometimes something will happen, like somebody will make a tweet or something happens in the culture, or like we're developing this course for Street Epistemology and we're talking about things related to SE. And it dawns on me, that one conversation I had 3 years ago would be perfect to illustrate this challenge that we're having now with SE. Mm-hmm. So then I'll unearth it to make it. So I look at the archives and the interviews that I have as they're not only ways to show how you can do SE, but they're ways of teaching the method to address the challenges that we face when we do it. So that's usually the impetus for me to say, it jogs my memory. Like, I need to pull that one up and fix it and get it out there. The other thing is that like sometimes I'm just lazy or I'm distracted. I'm busy with other stuff. Like I had a really good talk, but I'm going out tomorrow and then I go out the next time. And by the end of the week, I forgot about that great talk that I had. That's also a factor.
If anyone in the comments has any questions that they would like to ask Anthony before we get to the end of the show, go ahead and leave them. If you leave a super chat, I'll probably notice it a little bit quicker. It was only through luck that I noticed the last one. But speaking of, you using this masking technology to distort faces and backgrounds,
it's not perfect. Like you can still maybe kind of discern some of their features and things. But,
Sure, but the reason for doing that, obviously to protect anonymity, do you find that what do you think the reason is for why someone would not want their identity out there? They were obviously willing to sit down and talk to you, or stand up and talk to you probably, but why is it that they would be hesitant to have that uploaded for educational purposes or whatever?
I don't really know what their motivations would be for like changing their mind, but sometimes people, they discover the video and then they message me and say, can you take it down? Or then I try to negotiate with them, because sometimes there's thousands of views on it and lots of comments, and I just hate to destroy all that.
Sometimes people are afraid, a religious family member is going to see, they talked to an atheist and they were questioning their views. And
I think that's a part of it. Yeah. Like they don't,
it's not
maybe
always,
they don't feel like they did a good job. Like they were very confident to start, because they're like, oh, he looks friendly, he's interviewing people, and I can do that. That sounds kind of cool. And then they're too confident for the claim that they have confidence in. And they don't realize that until afterwards. So sometimes I think after the talk, they're walking away and they're processing the discussion. They're worried about being embarrassed. I think that's probably a big part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got a question in the chat from Simply Secular Dave. Is a lot of skepticism that you encounter initiated in someone who got burned / scammed / lied to?
I would say definitely yes. In fact, it's interesting that he said that, because I'm actually working on a new series on my channel called Scammer versus Skeptic. And I'm hoping to appeal to people who are interested in watching scam baiting and watching, people waste the time of scammers, expose scammers, etc. Learn about skepticism through watching it, so that maybe they could see that and then see other content on my channel, like my epistemology series. I think that would be great, because I think it becomes the case, like if you get fooled or you get scammed, whether it's fooled by a religion or of course scammed, then you now might want to learn some tools to help avoid letting that happen to you again. And I look at epistemology, philosophy, skepticism as like a form of mental martial arts that you're teaching yourself to be able to later defend yourself the next time you're attacked by either nonsense or scams or lies.
I like that. It's interesting too, because a lot of people think that we're attacking our conversation partners when we use this approach to demonstrate how effective it could be to look at a person's views. It's like, this is the antidote to being taken advantage of. This isn't.
But with that in mind, so I used to always be very curious, like, why do people hate street epistemology so much? Like, all we're doing is asking questions. But I do see how somebody can misuse SE, and I do see how somebody could, in fact, potentially be manipulative through it. And one of the reasons I say this is because you can ask somebody, if you perform a meta-analysis on any given belief or even proposition that you have knowledge of, if I break down how you arrive at it, there are enough questions I could ask that eventually I'll ask one that you don't have the answer for. I was giving the example the other day. You might say that that water consists of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. But if you let me perform a meta-analysis on how you know that, you might come to realize that there are some methods used in other beliefs that lead up to that proposition that you have knowledge of that you're actually not quite justified in believing in the first place. So any reasonable belief that somebody has, you can ask them questions, get them to a point where they don't know the answers. Now, here's where it becomes, this is where the ethics become necessary, is how do you go about that person not being able to answer a question? Because if you try to take this approach of you don't have an answer, therefore you're probably wrong, then I think you're making a very big mistake.
I agree. So this is all very timely because we're writing a course on street epistemology, and I've been tasked with writing the module with a few other people, and it will be double checked, on what is street epistemology. And there's a lot of misconceptions and misperceptions of what it is, and the manipulation aspect is part of it. But to your point, Shane, I think there's still benefit in that. Even if I discover, wow, I don't really have a good way of explaining how it's the case that there's 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. The discovery that I can't.
I was gonna say, and I was gonna let you talk because it seemed like we were about to say the same thing. But it's good to question all of your beliefs and bring yourself to the realization. You know, I'm a skeptic. I do advocate for, you know, pointing out the fact that you're not able to really know all of these things. But I think that you want to be careful. It's very important to be careful in how you respond to somebody not being able to justify something.
Right.
And maybe
because it still could be true. Like, this reminds me, I had this talk with this lady on the campus, and she was going around getting people to sign up to vote. And she agreed to do an interview. And this was our second interview. I think the first one was about the law of attraction or something. So she came back up and she was like, well, what topic should we talk about this time? And I said, well, why don't we talk about whether it's a good idea to vote or not? And she's like, well, absolutely, 100%. And we talked. And by the end of it, she was like, yeah, I guess maybe it's not so important that people vote.
Really?
So you could be potentially moving people away from things that are factually true.
Right. And if it's somebody you don't know, you know, because if you're somebody who's a friend of mine, I might get you to realize that you arrived at a belief for a really bad reason, but then I'll explain some better reason to arrive at that same belief and go, here you go. Now you actually know it. Before,
or at least say like, I hope this doesn't dissuade you from continuing to look for better reasons to support that view.
Right. And I did want to point out a comment in the chat by Simply Secular Dave. He said, and we know who he's referring to. He said, Darth Donuts is one of those people who asks leading questions to back his debaters into a corner, then claims a gotcha. And I think I wanted to point out that what presuppositional apologists do is actually pretty similar to SE in itself. They perform a meta-analysis of an atheist's belief that reason or logic work. And if you talk to somebody who's not into philosophy, they're going to have a really hard time being able to justify saying that logic and reason work and explaining why we should use them in the first place. So, and that was the sort of dishonesty I was referring to earlier, is you don't want to act like a presuppositional apologist. You don't want to ask people questions and then use their inability to properly justify it on the spot as a gotcha. You know, you want to treat it as, well, then let's go investigate how you arrived at it in the first place.
Yeah, that's a big difference with SE. Like, we want to be charitable in what we're hearing and repeating it back. And when I observe those exchanges, it's like jumping on the first thing that somebody says, not clarifying it, potentially misrepresenting it, but just being careless with the interaction. Right. Whereas with SE, it's like, no, I want to go really slow and methodical and figure out all the meanings of these words and help us work together. And there's not a collaboration going on in those examples.
Yeah, you're exactly. And that's one of the things that's important and different about SE. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it is very, very important. And I was talking about this just last night, to repeat what somebody said back to them the way, in your own words, the way that you understood it. And I've done this multiple times when doing SE. And if you say, okay, so are you saying, and then you give your understanding of it. If you get it right, then you can be proud of yourself. You've achieved something. You've accurately understood their belief and relate it back to them. I've had some people go, yes, that. And it's like you put it in words better than they did. But then if you're wrong, well, then it's a good thing you asked, because now you get to see where you misunderstood them. You go, okay, so are you saying that, you know, and let's say you ask somebody, are you saying that after transubstantiation, the wine literally turns into blood? And depending on if they're Catholic or, you know, some other denomination, they might go, no, that isn't what I'm actually thinking. And then you go, okay, so what is it that you think? And then you get to talk to them and further examine it. Because if you continue to criticize a belief that person doesn't actually hold, and that example is actually a pretty good one. If you start criticizing someone because, oh, you think that the wine literally turns into blood, if they're not a Catholic, they probably don't believe that. So, you know, if you criticize a belief that somebody doesn't actually hold, then you're just wasting your time. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's going to just only result in misunderstanding, frustration. They're going to think that you just don't care what they have to say.
Yep.
It's going to shut it down.
We did get a question in the chat from Miss Tuna. Conspiracy theories are harder to debate with people than religion, according to what she believes. Do you think that you should be using different methods when you're engaging with someone who has a conspiracy theory or who's offering something like that up versus having a religious belief?
I would
They're
probably
probably
the same.
Oh, go ahead, Shane.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the same way, whether someone's religious or a conspiracy theorist or both isn't the deciding factor about whether you should use SE or argue with them and tell them they're wrong. It's really the setting that you're in. What kind of person is it? What kind of relationship is it? Because there are instances where, I'm not going to do SE every conversation I have. If I'm doing a debate with a conspiracy theorist, I'm going to start stating some facts and telling them why they're wrong and how we know it. It's like, okay, well, if you're actually going to tell me that vaccines are microchipping people, I'm going to ask you to look up pictures of the needles that use microchips and how thick those are and compare those. You're going to actually start providing them with information to prove to them that they're wrong.
Is that a popular conspiracy theory, the microchips in syringes?
Yeah, and it's interesting because if you show people, like if you look at the needle, because microchips exist, like people get them for consensually, but if you look at a microchipping needle, it's like a grain of rice could fit through it. It's a really thick needle. You compare that with the needle used for vaccines, they're much smaller needles. So it's like, how are you trying to convince me that something thicker than a grain of rice is being injected in me through a needle that's that thin? That couldn't happen.
I noticed that there's sort of like two distinctions between like religious claims and conspiratorial thinking, and that is that it seems like religious claims meet psychological needs perhaps a little bit more than the conspiracy stuff. So like I get this promise of life after death. That's a very big thing. You don't normally get that with conspiratorial minded claims. And then the other thing is evidence. In religious claims, it's virtuous to believe without evidence in many cases. You could just take it on faith. But conspiratorial minded people think they have good evidence for it.
Mm.
So that might be one of the reasons why it might be a little bit more difficult to use this. But I would still, of course, advocate for SE for conspiratorial minded claims.
Yeah, definitely.
What evidence would you accept? You value evidence, it sounds like. What evidence would you accept to lower your confidence in this view? What would have to change with the evidence that you currently have?
Right.
Thank you, Tom's chair, for the $2, by the way. And Tom wants to know if you can use Street Epistemology to pick up chicks.
I won't say I haven't tried.
Okay. Would it be moral to do so?
I think it depends on how you do it, because it could definitely be immoral depending on how you do it. I don't know. The only time that I think I got a fake number or something like that. So I can't, I don't know.
There's some overlaps I'm noticing. Like, so if I'm at a club, or I don't do this anymore these days, but let's say I was at a club and I was interested in somebody, I might listen very attentively to what they say, repeat back what I'm saying for clarity, ask them a few challenging questions, but nothing overwhelming to confuse or frustrate them. Like what you see in normal SE interactions are things that humans tend to find appealing when we have human interactions.
I think this goes along with one of the questions in the chat from Simply Secular Dave wants to know, do you intentionally start with softer questions and see where it leads from there?
I mean, not intentionally, but you have to sort of build. Like you need to understand what the claim is and what the reasons are. And then when you get to the methodology, that maybe is when the questions get a little bit more challenging, perhaps for some people. But the very first question I ask somebody might be like, well, which specific God are we talking about? That could be a really overwhelming question for somebody that's never thought of it before. So you don't really know what is a strong question compared to a weak one.
Yeah. Hey, Shane, this one's for you. Do you think SE assumes a correct method of justification for beliefs?
Been thinking about this question for the last half minute, actually. You know what I would say? At the very least, it presumes it, but I think maybe we could say it assumes it, because if you're evaluating methods to see whether any of the correct might be the wrong word, maybe effective or reliable. Let's go with reliable. SE assumes a reliable method of justification for beliefs.
Exists.
Shane, do me a favor and teach me the difference between assume and presume.
So I think presuming something is a little bit weaker than assuming. So almost the same word, but to a lesser degree. So you might say presumably, and then something that is plausible, assuming it would be like, I'm going to take that to be true. So if I talk to a Christian, then I would say that presumably they don't agree with, the parts of the Bible that talk about like killing someone for being gay. Like presumably they don't believe that. I wouldn't assume that they don't believe it, because I recognize there being a possibility, over 5% chance that they will think that you should do that.
Could you put that question back up? Because I want to speak to that if I can.
For which one?
So
the from retro
presuming a method, or Sorry, I know this was for you, Shane, but
I'll go for it.
Practitioners of SE could think they have the best, most reliable method for figuring out what's true or not.
Right.
And I can go and initiate talks with people with that idea in mind. However, it's not my methodologies or my preferred methodologies or the methodologies that I think are the most reliable that matter. It's the person's reasons and methods of whom I'm speaking with that matters. Now, I may ask questions because I'm now biased, because I think I have this superior method, which might be the scientific method, compared to in my view, unreliable method, like maybe taking it on faith that it's true. But you have to hear your conversation partner out, because the way that they're defining the words and coming to their conclusions possibly could demonstrate that it's better than the method that you're currently using.
Have you ever encountered that before?
I haven't.
Okay, neither have I.
Not with faith, for example.
Right.
But I have had people define faith as, well, it's a belief, it's faith. Mm-hmm. Or they say faith means evidence.
Like
I've had people say that.
Yeah, that's different.
So you have to be really careful with words and that type of thing. But
I mean, if you're reading a particular translation of scripture, then faith does mean evidence, but you have to be taking it from that Bible verse in that translation in order to get there, I believe.
Yeah.
It literally says in Hebrews 11:1, faith is the evidence for things unseen, but only in some translations. So
to this question, though, like we have the box of Tic Tacs, like either there's a total number of odd pieces in there or even. And I'm going to surface my methodology for determining the total number of pieces. And you can surface whatever method you use. Like maybe you venerate with your pantheon of gods to derive answers. So you use your method, I'll use mine, and then we'll compare the results. And
I often use your what's it called? Your TikTok, Tic Tac, not TikTok. Tic Tacs are better. I often use that Tic Tac kind of question analogy when I ask somebody, if somebody ever talks about, and oh my God, if you ever want to piss a philosopher off, say something to the effect of, well, that's true for me, but it isn't true for you. If you ever want to really get under the skin of a skeptic, say something like that. But I always try to explain to people there's no such thing as your truth versus my truth. If I have a little box of Tic Tacs, there's an even or an odd number in there. If you think there's an even number and there's 9 in there, you're just wrong. It isn't your truth that there's an even number in there. You are just wrong.
We did get a very important question from Pasta Mike. He wants to know, this one's for Anthony. I'm not going to read that, but and
there are
you're entitled to answer it if you want.
No, that's not the impression that
I'm friends with everybody, so I don't have an opinion on that. Thanks, Pasta Mike. Thanks for joining us. He conveniently he joins whenever I shout him out, so it's like I call his name in the beginning of the episode and then magically he shows up.
Yeah.
So I did want to ask Shane really quickly, because you mentioned presuppositional apologists a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
Why do they exist?
Well, I think that presuppositionalism is actually a very effective tool to keep somebody away from leaving the religion. It's if you can get somebody to adhere to presuppositional apologetics, they may be a lot harder to reach. It might be harder for reasonable people, for skeptics, for secular people to reach them, because you've taught them this thing where they it's a dishonest tactic, I feel. But
are they manipulators?
I think so, yes. I don't feel like one can be an honest presuppositionalist. to me, that's almost it's almost an oxymoron, honest presuppositionalist.
I agree with almost all of that.
Oh, you used the word almost.
Well, I try to always allow myself a little bit of wiggle room.
Gotcha. I guess this question is for everyone. Do you think it's possible to introduce first-year high school students age 13 to Street Epistemology?
That's a great age to start introducing people to questioning and challenging adults. Because like usually when we're kids, we tend to like just go with what the teacher says. I've observed my kids doing online courses, and the teacher says something, and they're like, and then they nod in agreement. Like they considered it for a second, but then they went with it. And it was shocking to see my own kids do that. So yeah, of course, teach your kids to recognize authority, but not respect it necessarily. Okay. You can push back on it with questions. And that's something, especially in the South, I noticed like there's this big tendency to like, yes, sir, no, ma'am. That kind of
you don't disagree with people who are older than you.
Knock that shit out. Knock that shit out. Don't
seriously. It's so unhealthy. It's like, did you know that people who are older than you are wrong? Like, did you know that?
I have a story that kind of speaks to what you were just talking about, Anthony, because when I was a kid, a teacher told me something that I believed for years. It was a science teacher. And I used to tell this to people. I'm embarrassed about it now because I only accepted it because a science educator told me about it. And I just accepted the claim. And the claim was that bumblebees are aerodynamically incapable of flight. And this is something that he was absolutely serious about, told the students that. And most of us just believed it without question. And it wasn't until much later that I realized aerodynamically incapable of flight would literally mean it's not flying, and yet they are flying.
Are they hopping? How are they locomoting? How are they getting around?
They're fucking flying. So the statement is just incorrect. It's contradicted by the evidence. But I didn't question the science teacher who knows science.
Exactly. Yeah. I had almost the same problem. It was a history teacher that said it, but it was like, I think 8th grade history teacher said that mosquitoes transmit STDs because basically if a mosquito bites me and I have AIDS and then it, goes and sucks your blood, then it's almost like that same thing on the mosquito is almost like us sharing a needle, and you can get AIDS through sharing a needle. And I remember one day it was when I was at the ACA. I just kind of like said it casually, like it was something that I knew. It was just a piece of information that I got from a teacher. I knew it to be true. I thought I knew anyway. I was like, this is no. And I said it, and a few people questioned me. I'm like, no, look it up. And everyone looked it up and immediately was like, no, like you cannot get STDs from being bit by a mosquito. Of course, there are viruses that you could get, but not STDs. Malaria. So I was like, okay, so I just assumed that was true because my teacher said it. And now I realize that wasn't a good idea. So
see, it's not only about teaching the students, though, to question, but it's about teaching the teachers to encourage the kids to question.
See, and then that's one of the things that confuses me, because I totally understand that we can't all have the same interest. Everybody can't be into what I'm into. But as somebody who's into epistemology, it's weird to me that it's not something that we learn in school. Like, I didn't even know about the word epistemology till I heard of Anthony doing street epistemology. That was my introduction.
That was the first time I probably heard it, but didn't really grasp it.
Through SE, yeah. And then, learned about epistemology itself, non-street epistemology, just the study of knowledge. But I realized, I was like, wait a minute, they give us all this information. They don't teach us, how do you justify a belief? What does it mean to know something? What does it mean to be justified in a belief? What does it take? What is a justification? What are some reliable methods to arrive at beliefs?
I wonder if this is a U.S. issue, though. Like in Norway, are they teaching epistemology in 6th grade? What's happening?
I don't know, but I could tell you this much. kids graduating high school should know at least 20 logical fallacies. They should know what epistemology is. They should at least have some contemporary understanding of what epistemology is.
It's critical thinking that needs to be taught in high school. And
not just information. How do you interpret
Right.
the information? Because you're going to get all kinds of information. You're going to get contradictory information. What we need to give kids is some way to discern fact from fiction. And we're not doing that. We're just giving them, here's the information.
As we approach the hour, we do have one final question from Bible Burner, and it looks like it's a question for both of you. How often do you feel like someone's views have changed or at least started to waver after talking to them? And you can give a percentage or a number, I don't know, whatever.
It depends on the claim, but if it's a supernatural claim and they started with a very high degree of confidence, almost always there's some indication that, well, let me just put it this way. There's almost always a very obvious indication that they're thinking about it, because they'll tell you, or you can kind of discern it from the way that they're behaving.
Right.
But I don't always say like, okay, where are you now in terms of your confidence? And then let's do a post test. Sometimes it's like, I just don't roll out the scale. But it seems at least evident to me as the observer that
you can see it happen. Some of the videos you have, you can actually observe it happening. One of the videos that I remember is when Dan Earls, Objectively Dan, from one of your earlier videos, there's a moment in your conversation where you can see him, you can see like the light bulb go off. It's an amazing moment. Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah. Well, there are so many people who I just totally wish I could talk to a second time, people that I've done SE on, and seeing that light bulb go off and go like, I wonder where that guy is today, but I think I'm being more than generous in respect to supernatural claims. I think I'm being more than generous to myself if I say 10% of the time somebody's view starts to change. But there was one interview I did on Atheist Vanguard, and if anyone wants to look it up, it was the video is called "I've Seen Things." I don't do the roundtable, just the interview. And I remember at the end of it, I asked the guy, like, don't you think that if it was the case that a God didn't exist, how would you be able to differentiate between that and the reality in which one did? So if something, that you think a God did happened through some non-God explanation, how do you think you'd be able to differentiate? And the guy literally, he paused, you see him think about it, and he goes, wow, my mind hasn't gotten there yet. Okay. And he starts thinking about it and he goes, but I guess I could be wrong about that. All right. And you could see by the end of the interview, it's like, yeah, this guy may have definitely been leaning away from his faith shortly after this conversation.
Yeah. These talks might be just the nudge people need to think about it and get them started on a journey of really seriously thinking about the quality of their reasons and the strength of their methodology or epistemology to say, like, am I fine with that?
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was actually going to say, so I did, one of the first times I did SE, actually, I was lucky enough to have an interlocutor who was just on the edge of, leaving religion. It wasn't someone who had thought about it a lot recently, but he just wasn't very convinced. He clearly hadn't thought about it a whole lot. And I remember he was intrigued because he saw me at the dog park and I'm reading the Bible wearing a shirt that says "Talk Heathen" on it. And he's like, I got to talk to this guy. So he's, that was intriguing for sure. I talked to him. I do SE because I had just recently learned about your videos, Anthony. And this is a little bit before I started going to the ACA and all that. And I talked to this guy, and in 5 or 10 minutes, he was an atheist. He was like, holy fuck, dude, you're right about all of this shit. And then
I would be concerned about that.
Yeah, well, no, I ended up talking to him because the reason you're right to be concerned, but the thing about it is he was someone who was already on the edge of his belief. Because if you talk to someone who goes to church every week and has 100%,
I've been in it for 30 years. I've got all these facts, and then they change after 5 minutes.
In 5 minutes, right? That's
but different. You could very well run into say like Shane just described. They're right. They just need that one little question to get them thinking, and that just
And I would say, so two things. One is that it was actually, I went to the ACA and I talked about that happening, and that led to me being asked if I wanted to be on Atheist Vanguard, which actually led to my career. So in a pretty direct sense, Anthony, you did motivate me to begin doing what I started doing. So earlier when you said, we'll motivate more people to keep doing this, I'm actually an example as well, just kind of like Dan is. But then in respect to that, I remember the night that I became an atheist. So I left my religion when I was 13, but I became an atheist at 17. Between then, if you asked me if I believed in God, I would have used the word creator because I felt like God had religious baggage to it. But I remember the question that made me become an atheist. It's pretty simple. Why do you believe that a God exists? And it was so weird to me that it's like, has no one asked me that?
It's the simplest question in the world.
I got asked that. And it was when I realized all of the ways that I tried to justify it. I'm like, I didn't know the word question begging, circular reasoning, or infinite regress, but I did have those concepts. And I was like, yeah, I don't have any reason to believe one exists. And I already was like, I'm not necessarily saying I know there isn't one, but I don't believe that there is one. And if I don't believe in a God, well, that's what I understand what atheism to be. So,
and I would suggest to anyone appealing to faith, if they were to answer that question, or if they were presented with that question, why do you believe in God? Faith doesn't work as an answer because faith is believing in God. So you're essentially just saying you believe because you believe. So
depends on how they define that word, though, Bryce.
It depends on how you define that word. But if you're using faith,
it depends on how they define the word.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
But if you or they are using the word faith as a methodology, then at the very least, you ought to be prepared to explain the methodology. And that's the missing thing that I find.
Mm-hmm.
They're using it as though it's a methodology, but it doesn't appear to be one because they cannot outline the methods.
Yeah, but it's believing. Yeah, even people who practice SE, it's a lot harder than it sounds to apply it to your own beliefs, because some of the beliefs that we arrived at a time that we had a much weaker standard of evidence. So I remember it was like 5 or 6 weeks ago that I just kind of made a claim that I thought I knew, and somebody asked me how I knew that was true, and I realized I was like, I wondered when I was 16, I Googled it, and I believed like the first answer. So now that I have a higher standard of evidence, I have to re-examine my beliefs, and it's actually pretty difficult to re-examine your beliefs because, it's not like checking out the contents of a desk where you could actually open the desk and literally take everything out. When you want to think about the contents of your thinking, it's a lot harder to examine that. You can't actually pull every belief you have apart.
Final thoughts, Mr. Magnabosco. What is your hope? What is your dream? What is your goal? What do you want? What do you want from this?
I want people to respectfully challenge authority at every turn. I want it to become commonplace to ask questions and to have a desire to believe true things and not demonize people who change their minds. I want to make that accessible. I want to try to tamp down obscurantism and just talking in big words to confuse people and seem smarter than the other people. So improving communication and aligning the confidence that we place in our claims in coordination or tied to the reasons and methods that we have. I'm not asking for much. Like this is basic shit, but we need a cultural shift to make it normal. And that's what I'm pushing for with the nonprofit that we started and all the videos and doing these interviews and that type of thing. I want to get to the point where it's acceptable to say, I wonder how you concluded that that's true. And the person says, me too, actually, now that you're bringing it up, let's figure it out.
Right. And if
Go ahead, Shane.
the belief is in fact true, they could re-examine it and re-justify their belief in it. And then all you've done is strengthen their confidence in a belief that is true or justified. And I think that's very important too. One thing I want to do is I want to be able to provide, and one of the reasons I'm focusing more on epistemology than street epistemology, I want to be able to provide people who identify as skeptics with a sort of consistent, rational form of skepticism. There is such thing as radical skepticism, and I don't think people should be adhering to that because it makes a mockery out of rational, legitimate consistent skepticism, such as people like myself have, or believe that we have, I should say. But that's why I'm more into epistemology than street epistemology. But they complement each other. So I would encourage everyone listening to go in depth on both of these things. Question not only your beliefs, how you arrive at your beliefs. This should include propositions that you believe that you know. Being wrong and not knowing it feels exactly like being right. So remember that. And my life philosophy is predicated on my belief that everybody's wrong about at least something, and I'm a person, therefore I must necessarily be wrong about a few things, and I want to figure out what those things are. So that's part of my journey. So every time I get corrected, my goal is better achieved. So that's my long-ending answer.
I love that statement that when you're wrong and you think that you're right, it feels exactly like being right. It really does.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what I want is to bring in our executive producer, Oz, because he has a few words that he wants to say.
Who's that?
This guy I know. Okay. This guy I know. So, oops, there he goes.
Hey, Oz.
Good evening, gentlemen. How are you guys?
Pretty good. Nice to meet you.
Good.
Good. That was a great show.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I can take no credit for it.
That's not true. Did we get through all your questions?
You got through all of mine. Actually, you got through all of my questions halfway through the show. I was just sort of enamored by the two of you going back and forth. So
can I just add something that Shane said? Like somebody who's really studying epistemology and appreciates what we're doing in street epistemology. Did it make sense? You crinkled your somebody who is interested in epistemology like Shane is, who recognizes what we're doing in street epistemology is really valuable, because we have a lot of people who have experience in epistemology, but they tend to look down on what we're doing and they're not like helping us. And I think what Shane is attempting to do by getting into that could be really beneficial for the SE community. So I hope you keep pushing in that area and don't forget about us, like help us.
Yeah, no, these are, like I said, street epistemology and epistemology, contemporary or advanced, they complement each other. And, if you go study some epistemology, then you will become better at SE. And if you do SE as a practice, you will become more consistent in your own epistemology. Like I said, skepticism, genuine skepticism comes through habituation, in my opinion. So I think it's important to apply the Socratic method and give it practice. So SE is very valuable.
Don't worry, Anthony. Shane works for us now, and you and I are friends. So we'll get him in line.
That's great. I did want to say, so my only question to you guys in respect to the show. So did I talk a little too much or did I talk way too much?
You covered all of the areas that I missed. So
that's good.
Yeah. And I introduced you as the co-host. So you can talk as much as you want on this episode.
Well,
I opened the show by being wrong. And that's a very rare and unusual thing. So I felt like I didn't have a leg to stand
I wouldn't be a
on.
good skeptic if I didn't attempt to correct it.
The thing about being a skeptic and into epistemology is I was sitting there going, Anthony's about to correct him, and I believe that. It's probably true. I'm justified in my belief, but I don't know it right now. But I'm going to feel like I knew it when he says it. And then he said it, and I'm like, I fucking feel like I knew he was going to say it, but I couldn't have actually known it. So, because I could have been wrong. But that's a weird thing about being a skeptic and into epistemology.
We have words from Oz the Great and Powerful. Oz, what you got for us?
I don't know if we'd lump great and powerful in there, but I am Oz. So I thought this was actually perfect. Normally I don't jump in on the other shows, but with the conversation that was being had, I thought it was very fitting to give the official announcement with the dates now that are etched in stone, and they will not change. I don't care what happens. So we have better coming up. This is the first Tang in-person meeting, and we're going to have a ton of people. There's a couple people on there that we're like, hopefully the next 24, 48 hours, everything will be sent to those for speakers, but who we have confirmed 100%, Dr. Josh Bowen, T-Jump, Anthony Magnabosco, Cynthia McDonald, and Dave Warnock. And there's a couple others that we're having conversations with. And the reason I said that this was fitting to come on and talk about this is better. A lot of people ask, why is the title of it just better? The focus is better conversations. How do we have better conversations? And I think one of the greatest weaknesses we have in 2021, just as humans, whether it's religion, politics, social issues, equality issues, is we don't know how to communicate. We don't know how to listen. You know, when people hear somebody talking about listening, it's they think, well, I need to be. I'm preparing myself for what I'm going to say next, instead of seeking to understand. You know, and really understanding the person's position. That way, we can follow up with the next. The next logical or fitting question. So the whole event is going to really be based around that.
Being better.
Excited to be there for that. That might be the one and only conference I go to this year, by the way. I'm trying to scale back my conferences and that type of thing. But that's a big one. And you guys are doing good work, so I want to support you. Go to that.
Thank you. And we do. We appreciate you being there. And who else better to have by having better conversations, quality conversations than the OG. The OG.
Mr. Magnabosco. I'm sorry. Was that all? Was that all, Oz? Is that all you got?
Well,
better.
Here, I'll give you guys some love too, because opening up the event, Bryce and Shane are going to be opening up the event on having, what does it look like, to have a better conversation. Shane, Shane's going to be talking about what is knowledge, what is epistemology,
what is knowledge, can we have it? And the conversation, though the topic I'm going to be discussing isn't particularly word for word about better discussions, I will be adhering to that theme, and I'll be giving the talk in such a way that it'll really complement the talk that Anthony will give. And I'm saying that without knowing precisely what the talk he's going to give is, because I've listened to enough of Anthony's talks and discussions about SE and what tools he uses to, be prepared for that. So yeah, hopefully.
You proved it. You proved it at the beginning of the show. You knew exactly what he was going to say when he was going to say it.
Well, I didn't.
So you raised the bar for me, because I'm like, damn, now I need to come up with something really creative and new for this one.
Yeah.
And Shane's going to double dip. He's going to do that. And then day 2, he's going to, towards the end of the day 2, we're going to have 2 debates. And he's going to be part of one of those debates. So he's going to have to be on his A game.
Yes. I'm excited about that. That'll be the first debate that I get to have like a bit of an audience. Therefore, I guess in my first debate, there were like 10 or 12 people in the building. But it'll be great.
What's your win-loss percentage there, Shane?
Win-loss percentage, 100% loss.
Okay. Well, this will this will be a good debate then.
I don't win debates. I suck. I don't know what I'm talking about. So, yeah.
I smell a rope-a-dope.
Yeah.
A big part of debate is sort of stagecraft, isn't it? And
a big part of it is there's also, and it's one of the reasons I really like doing SE. And if you've noticed, having discussions on my channel where we discuss topics that get debated, but we're not necessarily debating, is as much as as a philosopher, I'm passionate about debate. But as a philosopher, I'm passionate about honesty and genuine conversations. And I can't tell you how many times it's happened in a debate where it's like, dude, this person's just trying to score points. They're not trying to have an honest discussion and figure out which one of us is right. It's, you're an atheist. I'm going to try to make you look like an immoral person because it's going to make me look like I have a better morality than you do. When instead it's like, well, why don't you give me questions about my morality? If I don't think it's objective, what do I mean to think something's immoral? Give me some honest questions. And so that's one of the reasons, it's good to see what Anthony's doing. I think you need to incorporate that into your more day-to-day discussions, because debates, I don't like the point scoring aspect that they tend to bring.
You got anything else for us, Oz? I can close this out. I'm ready to move on to Discord now. I don't know about you guys, but
yeah,
I actually got to go to work, so I should. I'm gonna have to hop out.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Anthony and Shane, if you want to join us on there, you're more than welcome. I'm sure other people have questions. If not, no pressure at all. And last thing I'll say, as far as the event that I forgot to mention, all the tickets and prices and everything will be out. The entire team, our deadline is Friday to have everything ready to rock and roll. So hopefully this weekend, tickets, prices, and all that will be released.
Sweet.
Good.
That's it.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody in the chat, first of all, for providing excellent supplemental questions. We got a couple of super chats there, so I'm very appreciative about that. You guys can join us in the Discord if you want. The link is in the description. And we also have links to Anthony Magnabosco's Twitter, YouTube page, and you can catch him doing more Street Epistemology. If you haven't checked out those episodes, start with Objectively Dan, only because he has his own show and you get to see the beginning of a deconversion possibly. But Anthony, thank you so much for doing what you do and bringing the knowledge that you brought. I appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
Hopefully you can feel free to join us again in the future whenever you're available. Same to you, Shane, although we kind of have you on lock, so you know.
Yeah, I'm here officially, but I will shamelessly plug my epistemology series and say, for those of you interested in it, there are 2 videos up so far, and together they are under 15 minutes. So if you have 15 minutes to learn you some knowledge, as I like to put it, go check out that epistemology series.
And you can find more of Shane here on Tang, as well as on YouTube channel Shane the Skeptic, where you are still uploading regularly.
Yep, and you can catch me in Indiana on October. What were the dates again, guys?
9th and 10th.
9th and 10th. We got it. See, I know my stuff.
All right. Well, if you guys have enjoyed the show, please hit that like button. You can catch me weekly on Tang, Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget to subscribe to the Atheist Network group for more content. And for producer Wes, Skids the Clown, and Sunny Shell, this is Bryce Cornell asking you to have your God spayed or neutered.